Welcome to For the Love of Pod, where we bring you the podcast experts so that you can become one yourself. In today's episode, we talk to Tanner Campbell from Podcasting Sucks, a podcast that regularly tops the charts. But he's also helped over 31 podcasters monetize their podcast and generate more than $10,000 per month through his production company, Tanner Helps. So you know why Tanner was the perfect choice to come on today to talk about how to make a business out of your podcast. Now, for most of us, our podcast starts out as a hobby, but it's an activity that requires a big time commitment that can be hard to juggle with your career, family, and just everything else that's happening in life. But what if your podcast could become your career? What if you could start making money out of your passion project? Well, Tanner has done exactly that. So we've asked him on today to talk about the steps needed to make a business out of your podcast. For the Love of Pod is brought to you by Oh My Pod, your one-stop shop for launching, editing, and growing a podcast. Whether you're looking to release your podcast with minimal fuss or reach more listeners, you're going to love our free training, where we help you podcast the right way and avoid all the common mistakes. I've pretty much put together the training that I wish had existed when I was starting out, and I think you're going to get a lot of value out of it. To download your free training, head to ohmypod.com.au. All right, now let's get into the show. So Tanner Campbell, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me, Danielle. I appreciate you being even interested in having me here.
Absolutely, Tanner. Now, Tanner, you're actually in the top 22 most influential people in the world of podcasting. So to have you on the show is actually a huge achievement for me. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing that up. It feels weird. I'm the only, what I think of as one of two normal people on that list. It's very strange to appear next to Gary Vaynerchuk for anything. So it's a humbling experience for me, and thanks for mentioning it.
Yeah, absolutely huge. Well done. So, Tanner, tell me, how did you get into the world of podcasting?
I've told this story before, and I can't remember if the last time we spoke I told this story, but when I was a kid, I used to watch a TV program called Pound Puppies. It was an animated cartoon, and I would watch it with my sister, and we had this little play school recorder, and we would, after each Pound Puppy episode, do like a Pound Puppy in reviews kind of, it was a podcast essentially. I mean, we didn't connect to an RSS feed because it didn't exist, but we would then go down to my grandmother and we would let her hear the recording and ask her what she thought about our review of the cartoon. So I want to say I got into podcasting in 1989. But what really drew me into it in all seriousness is I started this podcast with my girlfriend in 2010, and it was just kind of for a laugh. It wasn't anything serious. I didn't know what I was doing. It was my first time getting behind a microphone, other than that Pound Puppy story. And I took to it kind of like a duck to water, because up until that point and for some time after, I had a career in IT. So I was very technical, and I never considered myself to be very artistic. And I found that through my technical aptitude and this new medium, I was able to become creative and artistic. And I just kind of went from there. And that led to, over a series of years, me opening a brick and mortar studio in New England and getting more involved in a professional capacity and in an industry thought leader kind of capacity.
Absolutely, and hence the award with the most influential person, so one of the most influential people. So that's a huge transition from Pound Puppy.
It is, yeah. It only took, I don't know, 30 some odd years, but okay.
Now, tell me about Ghostcast. I believe you're now the Chief Content Officer for Ghostcast. Tell us what's that all about and who's it designed for?
I know that one of the things you talk about a lot is marketing and monetization and growth. And I think that any podcaster who's been podcasting for longer than 5 minutes knows that the tools that we have to promote our shows they're unfortunately limited. And I think the root of that problem is we deal in a medium that for the most part is an invisible medium. You can't see audio, you can only hear it. So when you want to represent that audio in marketing, there's a challenge. You've got your cover art or your episode artwork, or you've got a wiggly audiogram, from a place like Audiograph or Headline or any of those places. And we know that those do a decent job of keeping an existing audience engaged, but they don't do a really good job of encouraging new listenership, because where people come across those things are not the places that people are generally in the mood to suddenly say, hey, that's cool, let me go listen to a podcast. So Ghostcast is a tool set that we're working on to help make audio, that which is audible, I should say, because it's not just podcasts, it's audiobooks and musicians as well, that which is audible, more visual. And the way we're doing that is, well, the tool set helps you to take your audio and pair it to something like 2D avatars, 3D avatars, 4K, 30 frames per second, high quality video. And there's this really neat part of the tool that I think most people on the Ghostcast team are the most excited about, which is you can pull in audio through, or rather, you can pull in content from a web address. Like, let's say you wanted to do a review of an article that was written in the newspaper. So it'll pull all that content in and it'll format it as just text and pictures. It'll get rid of all the ads and everything. And as you record over that, as you speak, the AI engine searches out there into the World Wide Web and pulls in relevant images and videos, so that as you're talking through this content, let's say you're talking about Elon Musk, for example, it'll pull in a picture of Elon Musk when you say his name. It'll show the Mars rover lander kind of thing in a video when you start talking about that. And so you wind up being able to add more rich visual elements to your content, to your audio only content. And I mean, it's cool. It's really cool.
Wow. Because recording an episode's one thing, but then to go, okay, now how do I market it? How do I create all that content?
Mm-hmm.
It's huge. And let's face it, like most of us start out our podcasts as a hobby, and then we pretty quickly get that slap in the face and realize how much work's actually involved
100%.
in it. And I'm not sure there's anybody out there who doesn't say they already have a hectic life. So for some, podcasting can be pretty overwhelming, and that they are maybe not getting results quick enough, so they choose to quit. Whereas there's others who become a geek out on it, like you and I imagine, where we go, hang on a minute, we want to take this further and turn it into a career. So tools like Ghostcast is absolutely going to help with that. But tell me, like, if I am at that transition stage where I'm going, okay, I do want to turn it from a hobby into a business, what does that transition actually look like?
Well, it depends on what your idea of a business is. Some people, and I think this is the hardest row to hoe, as my father would say, want to turn the content itself into the product. And I think that is just absolutely hella hard. So these are the people who want to sell ad space. They want to monetize through sponsorships or ads. And that's all tied to CPM, which I'm sure you've talked about 100 times on this podcast before. And or it is tied to elective donations through things like Patreon or Supercast or whatever. Because that's a numbers game, you have to be able to grow your audience to a pretty significant number that is just, as an amateur or as a hobbyist, or even somebody like you and I who take it very seriously and have the skill set necessary to produce something really great. The competition that is out there vying for people's, let's say 8 hours a week they might spend listening to podcasts on average, the kind of money that's behind some of the people who are really competing hard in that space, we can't compete with that. So when people come to me and they say they want to grow their podcast into a business, the first thing I ask is, do you want the podcast to be the product, or do you want to build something else based off the podcast? And when they say, I want the podcast to be the product, I say, okay, I've got some suggestions about people whom you can work with, but that is not, I think I'd have to work just with you for the next 2 years to make that happen for you specifically. I'm more the type that says your podcast, first of all, develops deep relationships with people. And, the know, like, and trust saying, everybody's probably heard that a million times, such that it's almost a cliche, but it's true. When people know you, they get the opportunity to come to like you and trust you. That is a very powerful position to be in if you have something that could expand on the experience that they gain out of the podcast. For me, it's courses, books, things like that. For other people, it's products and services. And that podcast acts as and can act as a really advanced funnel, a top of funnel. And of course, anybody starts talking about funnels and half the room will roll their eyes because we've all seen terrible funnels and
Yeah,
terrible funnel
absolutely.
websites. But I think about it as this is a relationship marketing tool. It's something that is self-qualifying. Nobody's going to listen to it unless they're interested in the content. And that means anybody who's listening to you speak trusts you, shows up day after day or week after week, whatever it is, because you're providing something that they are seeking, and you're providing it in a way that's unique to your personality, and they identify with that. So you've got people who are showing up, trust you, and you're not the only one doing what you're doing, I'm sure. So they're choosing you over other options. And I just think if you've got something else to sell, something else to offer, something more rich than just the podcast, you're in a very advantageous position.
Absolutely. And so for those that, so there's the product route, there's, and as you said, like courses and books, and there's the sponsorship route, which is a pretty long haul to try and get some sponsorship. How do you actually pitch to get sponsorship? Like, what type of information do they want to see? And how do you actually measure what you're worth in terms of when you're going in? You know, is this your Dr. Evil moment where you're going like $1 million and everyone just laughs at you? Or like, how do you get to a figure?
I think it depends on what kind of sponsor you're going after. What I will suggest to people is you need to be able to walk into a pitch meeting not with numbers of how many people listen. Maybe you're new, maybe you want a first year sponsor and you want to bring them in for 30,000. I've helped people do that. I've helped people bring in 50,000, I think is the highest first year sponsorship I've gotten for one of my clients. And it's not about how many listeners you have. It's about what 1% of your estimated end of year listenership will be. And is that 1% worth of conversion worth whatever you're asking for? Because if the product that is sponsoring you, the service or the company or whatever it is that's sponsoring you, has a product that costs, I don't know, $5,000, and they want to invest or sponsor you for, let's say, $30,000, well, that's 6 conversions they need to make it worth their investment. And they're going to want more than just worth their investment. Maybe they want to double that. So is your estimated growth at the end of the year cumulative? Because it's not linear, right? The success isn't linear and the conversions aren't linear. Can you convince them that you're going to grow large enough for 6%, or rather for 1% to equal the amount of conversions they want? Because they'll trust that 1%. So it's not about the downloads. It's about the pitch. It's about convincing them you have the potential to actually reach that number.
Yeah. Okay. So is there any metric internally that you should be looking at to going, okay, like I'm just started my podcast. It's just around building that listenership. Should that be your number one hurdle that you're trying to hit, to then give yourself a bit of clout to go and have that discussion?
You're asking if you should wait until you have that discussion, or if you should have it right off the bat?
Yeah.
I think you should have it right off the bat, because
Okay.
the risk is the longer you go, the more numbers you have and the less projection you can do, right? The less flexible projection you can do. It's not about being honest. It's not about being dishonest, rather. It's about having a little bit of flexibility in what you're promising. And that might sound a little bit dishonest, and I understand people might feel that way, but you
It's a
have to
projection.
be, it's subjective, and
Yep.
projection, but it's also, you have to be of the moral fabric to be honest about what you're projecting, and to back up why you think you can reach that. So for example, let's say you're going for something kind of easy, $10,000 for the first year, and you want 100% or 50% up front. Usually it's 100% up front. You'll say, And let's say you need an audience of 1,200 by the end of the year, because 1% of 1,200 equals whatever their product is. That's where they'll be happy. You need to show them evidence that you have a plan in place to get to that number. So that could be a pre-launch mailing list. It could be your success in your business in that niche, pre-podcast, surrounding the podcast, and why you think you can grow that audience, why other people can't. So again, it's about selling them on you and the concept and your ability more than it is about selling them on any number. And even after you have the numbers, it's still not, even if you have great numbers, go ahead and throw them in the presentation. But it's really not about that. They care about the 1%. It's the only thing they care about. So if you have a podcast and 1% makes them happy, your sponsorship pitch is going to be easy. But if you don't have the podcast yet, if you don't have the listenership yet, then that pitch is going to be very difficult if you can't sell yourself and your own abilities. That's the most important thing.
Yeah. Okay. So what about like with that? Can you be too authentic? And what I'm coming from here is you are, and I hope you don't mind me saying this, but recognized as a straight shooter in the industry. You can be a controversial character, but you've got an authentic voice, and you're not afraid to use it. And that's what I love about your style and your blog, Tanner Helps. But when you're coaching clients, do you try to get them to mellow that down or maybe balance it out a little bit and to appeal to a wider audience? And does that play an impact on a sponsorship?
I do not do that. And it's funny that you're asking me this, because just today, my podcast is called Podcasting Sucks. And I was having a conversation with a guy named Pat Chung, who runs a company called podinbox.com. And we were talking about the volatility of my podcast name. And his position was, if you're a podcast brand and you want to put your podcast, Podcasting Sucks, on your front page as like a sponsor or something, maybe there's a liability there, because, well, I'm a podcast company, but I've got Podcasting Sucks on my front page. That doesn't look good. So I polled my community, and the community mostly agreed with the fact that they think it's on brand for me. And I think it's important for the image that you communicate to people to be the image that you can consistently deliver on with very little effort, because eventually you're going to fall back to that. You can only fake it for so long before it creeps through. And so ultimately I tell in any client communication where this comes up, I say, no, you need to be you. If you curse, curse. If you're brash, be brash. As long as your heart is in the right place. And I think I'm a great example of this. So long as your heart is in the right place and you're helping people and you can do the things you say you can do, so long as you're not being a charlatan and you're not trying to mislead people, I think that honesty just gets rid of the people who wouldn't jive well with the character. And I think that's fine, because the other thing it does is bring all the people who do jive well with that character closer to you. So I would never tell anybody to, soften it up because of a sponsorship. I've never had to do it. And I don't think anybody else has to do it. I think thinking you have to do that is what can maybe lead to less success. I mean, that's very anecdotal. I don't have evidence for that, but that's my own experience.
Yeah, great. And now you mentioned before about faking it.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people get caught up in vanity metrics of listeners and followers and things like that. What do you think of people who actually go and buy fake listeners and fake buyers? Like, from a sponsorship perspective, can they see through all that?
So the easiest way to spot when somebody's done this is when their follower count is high, but their interactions are low. Like they've got 1 million followers, but they get 2 likes per image. So people are beginning to more easily spot when somebody's a fake. But the other thing is, there's no benefit to having people who don't actually listen to you. So let's say you go out and you buy 1 million followers and you dupe somebody into sponsoring you based on that 1 million followers. And they're all fake, they're all bots, or they're people who live in countries that can't even connect with the services that are promoting you or the products that are promoting you, you might fool a couple people doing that. And I'm sure some people do fool a couple people doing that. But eventually, the word is going to get around that the conversions don't match this inflated number of followers. And it's going to fall out from underneath your feet. You're going to have to start all over. I've also, fortunately for me, never run into anybody who actually thinks it's a good idea to try to lie to people. Like, speaking aspirationally about the potential audience you truly believe you can build is a very different thing than saying, I'm going to flat out lie to somebody about how many followers I have so that they think that they can justify $6,000 a month in sponsorship money, and I can probably dupe them for 3 months, and then I'll just run away and start a new account. I don't know any people like that, thankfully. And you shouldn't do that. If you're listening and you're thinking about doing that, don't do that. That's a bad thing to do. And it will damage you in the long
Absolutely.
run,
And I
for
think,
sure.
yeah, absolutely. And businesses this day, like they're going to do their due diligence before they hand over any money and things like that. And it just, the reputation damage is going to be huge. So I agree. Growing your audience, doing it your actual self, and by putting in the hard yards. And speaking of which, let's talk about podcast advertising.
Hmm.
Is it worth it? And how do you cut through the noise?
Do you mean me advertising on another show or allowing someone to advertise on mine?
Let's look at both.
So I think that advertising on other shows, if you do your due diligence, can be very successful. We've seen in the Infinite Dial, for example, and the latest one was just released at Podcast Movement Evolutions. We've seen that the rate at which people actually listen through ads is pretty high. Now, I think that might have something to do with the fact that people have begun to list Spotify as their number one platform on which to listen to podcasts, which is amazing to finally see. I'm actually a fan of Spotify. I'm a little bit of a fanboy, so I'm glad to see that. But there's a thing about Spotify. If I'm not mistaken, you can't skip their ads. So as more people move to Spotify to listen to podcasts, placing ads in podcasts probably is going to become a little bit more effective, because in the same way that you can't get through an inserted ad in something you're streaming on Hulu or something, you'll drag the scrubber all the way to the right, but it'll just reset and you got to watch the damn ad anyway. I think that more people are just listening through ads because they have to, and I think
Mm,
that that's going to drive up conversion rates.
mm. Okay, good to know. Now, what about the mistakes that people make? So, what are some of the common traps or mistakes that you see people fall into when they're trying to turn their business or their podcast into more of a commercial type business?
I think that they don't understand how long it takes. I think they get burned out on the effort very quickly. If you've never owned a business, know that you're not going to make any money in any new business you start for a couple of years. You're going to be operating at what's called a loss, and you're going to want to quit more than once, and you're probably working a day job at the same time. If you do have a business and it's very divorced from media, I think that you make the common mistakes that you would make when ascribing what you know about physical business A with digital business B. I think a lot of those skills translate, and I think a lot of those skills do not translate. And in that case, I would say the number one mistake those people make is that they don't reach out to experts. They don't try to educate themselves on what they don't know. If you're coming from an established business and you're successful, there's an ego that necessarily comes with that. I know that if I started a new podcast business tomorrow, I might think, I mean, who am I? I know my stuff. Eventually, you get so good at things that you kind of, that ego creeps in all of a sudden, and you're not as open to learning things as you used to be. So when people who own non-digital businesses or non-media businesses step into podcasting and think they're going to adopt it either as an additional revenue vertical or as a new business altogether, I think the number one mistake they make is they don't take the time to consider how much they actually don't know and how that can lead them astray.
Mm, yeah, that's a good point. And so, from a practical tips perspective, for people who are don't necessarily have time to muck around and do that trial and error thing, what are 3 or 4 practical steps that you would encourage people to take from day one around how to turn in their podcast into a business? So you mentioned before about educating themselves around the digital world. Where do they go to educate themselves?
Free resources, YouTube, but you got to be careful with a place like that because there's no vetting to the experts that are calling themselves experts on that platform. I think looking out for people who are and this is not, I'm not taking clients, so this is not a pitch for me, but
Yeah.
finding and seeking out people like me who are experts in the space on a consultant basis. I think you need to be doing that. I think somewhere in your budget needs to be a few hundred, a few thousand, depending on what that consultant's pricing is, of, a few weeks worth of time to learn what you don't know, and to learn what you don't know you don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. It is that, it's that thing. You don't know what you don't know. And I actually interviewed Evo Terra the other day about like just how much the industry's changed in the time that he's been in it. But even when you look at the last 6 months, like I feel like if I had have done all my research and wasn't constantly getting up to speed with what's changed in the last 6 months, 12 months through the whole COVID period, particularly, it's changed so dramatically and continuing to change.
There has been more change in the podcast industry between 2019 and right now than there's ever been since day one. It's immense and it is difficult to keep up with. One of the reasons I don't take many consultant clients anymore is, well, of course, first of all, I'm fulfilling my role at Ghostcast, but also it is hard to keep up with everything. It is almost a full-time job to keep yourself educated, which is another suggestion I would make for people not wanting to make missteps, is consider you might need a team for this. Maybe it's not a consultant, maybe it's a hire.
To help with what kind of roles?
Well, to help with the marketing, you need somebody who understands not just marketing, traditional marketing, that's helpful, but also marketing around the podcasting industry, PR around podcasting. I know that there are PR companies right now that I will not name that I've worked with in the past who are struggling to understand how to take what they've done for their clients traditionally in print, magazines and such, and radio and television, and transcribe it over to podcasting because they don't know how to identify useful podcasts. Where should people be? How do we communicate with these people? What are the rates we should be paying? And part of that is because things are changing so quickly, as we were just talking about. But the other part of it is, the largest part of this community of podcasting is comprised of mostly non-business savvy, unprofessional, hobbyist turned semi full-timers that are trying to figure it out just as much as everybody else is.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, it's interesting, isn't it? Because now at an age where there's so much information available to us, it's actually trying to weed out what's legit and what's BS. That's
the problem facing new podcasters of who do I listen to is insane, because everyone can. It seems that people have gotten very good at speaking with authority. And if you're somebody who knows nothing and you hear somebody speaking with authority, well, they're speaking with authority, so, and they know more than I do, so maybe this is the man or this is the woman to listen to. And unfortunately, it's not as easy as all that. You got to be careful, and there are a lot of solutions, in quotes, solutions out there that cause more problems than they provide solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. So Tana, tell me, how can people find out more about you, reach out to you? What's the best way for people to find you?
Everything that I do, with the exception of Ghostcast, which if you want to learn more about, you can go to ghostcast.io. But if you want to learn more about me and my history and the stuff that I do, you can go to tannerhelps.com. All my podcasts are there. Way to contact me. All my work is there. Everything you could possibly want to know about me, poor you, can be found at tannerhelps.com, and anywhere on social under the same handle at tannerhelps. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I am most active on Twitter. I'm there every day.
Excellent. And Podcasting Sucks is your podcast as well. So that's another way we can tune in and get some of your wisdom of of what's going on in the industry and help to, I don't know, demystify or defunk some of the podcasting myths that are out there, which is what I really enjoy. So
yeah, if you could stand the sound of my voice every weekday morning, yes, you can listen to Podcasting Sucks. And
excellent.
you can submit questions too. So that's one of the things that's important about that show to me is any listener can submit any question and I can provide the best advice I can give. And you never have to pay for that. So advice is free and I give it every day.
Wonderful. Tanner, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Daniel.
My pleasure.